have you guys found this year? I'll hold off my own thoughts for now, but I've got plenty to say on it. But in terms of the films we've got, the TV shows we've had, the things that have come and gone, how have you found 2023 to be in Hollywood and entertainment?
Oh man, it's actually kind of terrifying that I thought it was pretty much a burnt year until Minus One came out. Thank God for Japan. Every time it's Japan comes in and saves us from just outright terribleness, because I can't even think of a good example that really sticks out in my head until Godzilla, which was barely a month ago. So
yeah,
it's pretty terrifying.
Yep.
Yeah, Minus One was, to me, that was the best film of the year.
Yeah.
I'm not massively in line with you on the year being completely down the pan. There was actually some good ones. I just think we often forget about them, or they're such small projects that they get overlooked, unfortunately. But Minus One was the best, and it's actually the best film. It's one of the best films I've seen for quite a while, because it juggles quite a lot of things. Not merely just the subject matter of course, a gigantic monster, which it does that expertly well, but it's all the other elements of of the film which it does so well. That hands down took it as the best film of the year for me, unequivocally. Nothing tops that.
Yeah. It was probably my favorite. I mean, I guess things like Oppenheimer, you could probably argue there's maybe a bit more artistic merit behind it or whatever, but just in terms of the film that I enjoyed the most, it probably would be Godzilla Minus One. I just think it had so much heart behind it. And it just warms your heart, really, when you see a relatively small film like that. Like, it was originally quoted at $15 million for a budget. Apparently, it was way less than that even. Like, the director came out and said, I wish we had $15 million to make this. But yeah, the little film that just achieved this unexpected success and just showed us that, hey, yeah, we can still get good movies that entertain us and don't really try to preach too much in the way of messaging, but just like primarily are there to tell a good story with interesting characters. And hey, if it's got a giant lizard that shoots atomic breath and blows up entire cities, like, all to the good. It makes for good spectacle.
Yeah.
So
that's all we ask for. Like, that's all I ask for is a good film that kind of portrays, a strong man, a character arc that actually pans out. He's not just a failure at everything and then ends up being just a failure at the end. And then a strong woman that nurtures rather than, is swinging her fist around, like having to fly into Godzilla herself because the dude just couldn't handle it because of too much anxiety. And that's all I need. I just needed like a normal story. Just back to basics is all I'm asking for really nowadays. It seems like
that is the standout thing, isn't it, about Godzilla Minus One, is that actually there are some truly exceptional things, but most of what makes it exceptional is that it's doing what used to be considered the normal ingredients of good storytelling. You have a character who begins at point A and ends at point Z, and there are every intermediate stage. There's the occasional twist, there's the setback, there's him coming to terms with his war grief, overcoming survivor's guilt. Then there's the exceptional stuff, which is the way they sort of tie it in with fairly accurate, as far as I know anyway, kind of depictions of Japanese history and culture, which gives it this extra air of truthiness to it. And it's one of the best things. There's a couple of like contrivances in it, and like you have to hand wave away the fact that the American government doesn't get involved and the Japanese government doesn't get involved, which is, it's not the smoothest hand wave I've ever seen, but it's kind of secondary to the point. And then you have to sort of forget as well that, well, if you can fly a plane like kamikaze into its mouth, then why didn't you do that from the beginning? But otherwise, all the character stuff is really, really good. And that was really refreshing to see. And it's going to be fascinating, I think, when Godzilla X Kong, The Rise of the Shippers, or whatever they call that film, is coming out, just to compare, Hollywood Godzilla versus authentic Godzilla. And a side-by-side comparison, because I suspect Godzilla X Kong is not going to come out of that comparison very well.
I mean, when I watched the previous one, it was just one of the dumbest films I'd ever seen. When they go into the Hollow Earth and King Kong's like floating around because gravity apparently just like switches on a dime because that's how physics works. All that dumb stuff. The difference with Minus One is that it didn't feel like it played down the intelligence of the audience. Like, it didn't treat the audience like complete idiots. Like, it wasn't necessarily a hugely complicated plot, but it still credited them with a little bit of understanding of characters and the position that Japan was in at the time. And even the solutions they come across to try and fight Godzilla. Like, it all felt relatively logical. Like you say, there's a few contrivances that you have to just accept for the sake of the film working, but it didn't feel like it dumbed down its story for the sake of the audience, whereas that's very much where the American Godzilla series has gone.
Yeah, like, if anything, you would expect the majority of certainly the Western audience to miss a lot of the subtleties and the nuance in the character depictions, because we're not all that familiar with Japanese society in the sort of the late 40s through 50s. So a lot of the nuance stuff is probably that the writers wouldn't have expected that to land particularly well. But the fact that it's there makes the whole thing contiguous. Like, it feels like a real world, a real depiction of real people suffering with real historical problems. And you don't necessarily need to know every detail to understand that it's a fairly faithful depiction. Obviously, if you do know the details, it helps immensely, but not assuming that your audience is dumb is helpful, I think, and not trying to pander to every one of their sort of their worst impulses is also really helpful. Both of which make that a really refreshing film.
I think it's a good example of how quality storytelling is truly universal. So the fact that it's this set in post-World War II Japan, a vastly different culture from the one we exist in now, but the characters resonate with people so that you just get them, you get where they're coming from, and you don't necessarily need to understand all the nuances of Japanese culture to know that, okay, the relationship between the main character and his sort of quasi-girlfriend and the little girl that they've adopted is extremely unorthodox for the time period. We get it, okay, and it's fine. You can get behind that. I think that's just a great. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say I think they did such a good job anyway, because the elements that are the sort of core of the film itself in terms of its sort of character elements and more on a sort of a humanistic level as opposed to anything else. Like, there's no sort of ideological elements there involved in it regardless. And, you know, you don't need to know, you don't need to sort of be intrinsically familiar with 1940s Japan or even Japanese culture now to understand anything that plays out, because they step by step, you know, explain it in the interactions. Oh, he's back. Why is he back? Oh, that's dishonor. You're this, you're that, etc. I need to, you know, regain my honor. I feel this. I feel kamikaze pilots. So they do all this stuff really, really well in, like, actually within the story, which is now in, you know, Western Hollywood movies so ham-fisted and just awfully done. It didn't feel, or it just didn't treat the audience like idiots, but it explained it in a way within the story, the actual material at hand. And yeah, I mean, it was, I also think there's elements, you know, in there which I think everyone can universally, you know, sort of, there's an affinity for everyone to agree with some of the things that are in there, or at least have some sort of empathy with anyway. They talk about the kamikaze pilots, and, you know, it's actually very anti-government in some elements, right? It's anti-Japanese government. It puts a spotlight on how Japan just threw away its young men in needless war with kamikaze pilots. I mean, that's absolutely unbelievable.
It is, but there's the additional complication with that, because there were a number of sort of failed so-called kamikaze pilots who were really stigmatized all the way through to, I think, the 1960s, even then, because they were, even though, you know, it seems insane to say, yeah, we're going to throw away the lives of our young men. The fact was, the mentality at the time was, you have to give your life honorably in service of your country. And if you don't do that, even if we lose the war, you are still going to be an outcast societally because you failed to live up to the lofty ambitions. And that's the underpin of the protagonist's arc anyway, is that he realizes or believes that he's a failure and he thinks he should have died. And he has to learn to come to terms with living in this bold new world. And it's not just his arc as well. It's kind of the arc for his semi-wife and also the mechanic character as well.
Yeah,
that's the same thing. You have to learn to live in the future, and come. You know, you have to overcome the fact that you feel you let your nation down. It's surprisingly complex, but like it's not something that we've never done. If you the closest comparison, I think, probably in Hollywood is Jaws, and there's a couple of Jaws's sort of Jaws references in there as well, like when they throw the mine into the mouth and blow it up, for example. And if you compare the amount of screen time that the monster gets and how much of the focus of the narrative is really on the monster versus on the characters, Jaws is quite a similar film, and that's something, you know, we were able to do back in the 1970s. And it's deservedly one of the, you know, the best films Hollywood has ever produced. It's no mystery how that works, because Godzilla Minus One comes out, does many of the same things, and is also lauded as an incredibly good film. Maybe there's a lesson to be learned from that.
I was going to ask you, Ruin, as well. Speaking as a man who likes to subvert expectations, the point where the protagonist is about to kamikaze his plane straight into Godzilla's mouth and blow him up. Do you feel that scene could have been improved if a strong, independent woman had crashed her plane into his and stopped him from doing it, and then taught him a lesson about protecting what you love?
Yeah, I mean, it's taking inspiration from the Holdo maneuver, clearly. I mean, I feel like I was slightly ripped off there. But yes, as for Godzilla, well, interesting plot lines, well-developed characters, great visuals. I fucking hated it. It annoyed me so much. But anyway, never mind. But I have to say, Drinker, through these piss holes in the snow, I'm just looking at the chat. You have a very educated chat there. I mean, we were talking just before the stream, and we were really struggling to think of many good things in 2023. But the chat have come up with quite a few there. So fair play to all the man babies in the chat. Yeah.
I'm going to go through them in a second. There was one I was just going to, a super chat I was just going to do here. It was from Texas Krav Maga, whose t-shirt I'm sporting. And they didn't sponsor me or anything. It's just I like the t-shirt. They gave it to me. It's like when I was at a con. Thanks for sporting our shirt. Glad you like it. Taking 3 other martial arts instructors and students of mine to see Godzilla Minus One today. It's the 3rd time for me and the 1st for them. Thanks for all your work in 2023 and look forward to your upcoming movie in 2024. Thank you very much, my friend. I appreciate it. And I'm very much looking forward to releasing Rogue Elements. I just shared the first teaser trailer on Patreon just today, actually, and I'm going to be sharing a lot more clips and stills from behind the scenes over the next few weeks as we build up to release. But it shouldn't be too long now. It's pretty much ready to go.